The following half-hour show is a paid political program and is not endorsed by this station, management, or staff.
The following program is sponsored by Excalibur Insurance Management Services.
We are pleased to have on today's show Republican congressional candidate Jim Bognet. He is running as the Republican nominee for the United States Congress from the 8th Congressional District. This means, of course, he is taking on incumbent five-term Democratic Congressman Matt Cartwright for the right to represent the 8th Congressional District next term. As Jim has been on the show numerous times, you may remember, but I'll remind you, that he was born and raised in the Hazleton area and graduated from Hazleton Area High School, where he played football. I'm sure you've seen some of his commercials, which shows him kicking a game-winning field goal to help Hazleton area win a championship. Upon graduation, he went on to the Pennsylvania State University, graduating with a degree in business administration. And from there, he went across the country to California to do his postgraduate work at UCLA, where he received a master's in business administration. Not done, he then went on to law school at UCLA and received his Juris Doctorate degree in law. He is, of course, an attorney. He has been very active in politics for a long time. Jim first worked for former United States Senator Rick Santorum, and then he went to work for United States Congressman Lou Barletta. He then went on to have senior roles in 3 presidential campaigns, and most recently received an appointment from President Donald Trump to serve in his administration. On this week's show, we will be discussing the recession the Biden administration will not admit to, the crushing inflation which continues to accelerate as President Biden and the congressional Democrats continue to stoke with unmitigated spending, as well as the brutal attack ads that have introduced a level of invective seldom seen in political campaigns. It should be a good show.
This is the Volpe Report, a weekly news and political interview show examining the latest local, state, and national issues with Chuck Volpe. Insightful, informative, controversial. The area's premier political talk show, the Volpe Report.
Jim, welcome to the Volpe Report.
Thank you.
In all the guests I've interviewed at 300 or 350 shows coming up on our 10th year, this may be the simplest startup question I've ever asked in all this time. How's the campaign going?
It's going fantastic, Chuck. We are getting such enthusiasm. People are sick of the Biden-Cartwright policies. They're sick of what's happening in our country, from energy prices to how we're doing across the world. There's just a tremendous hunger for change. I think people have said we're tired of getting the same old leaders, the same old politicians, and the same results, which is no results. Inflation out of control, our economy going into a ditch. I believe we are in a recession. So we're getting tremendous enthusiasm and support. It's great to say in our last poll we are up against a 10-year incumbent who hasn't done much. So we feel fantastic.
Everything that Congressman Cartwright had in his favor 2 years ago is not just against him this time, almost historically. Historical inflation. We have people that are going to have to make a decision this winter in America, in Northeast and Central Pennsylvania, whether to turn down their heater and their thermostat because they can't afford their energy bills, cut out trips that are absolutely not necessary because they can't afford the gas in their car, and then you go to the food store for the grocery store for your foods, and they're up almost 15%. We have people going to have to decide, Jim, heat or eat in America. Take it from there.
I know in my heart we're going to win. We're going to win because there's a tremendous longing for change. We are a conservative part of the state. This country is basically a conservative country. And after seeing what Matt Cartwright and Joe Biden have done, I mean, gasoline prices have gone from $2 a gallon 20 months ago to $4 a gallon. Electricity prices are out of control. There are people that won't be able to turn the lights on this year. As you said, I'm worried we're going to have people freezing to death in Wilkes-Barre and Scranton and Hazleton this year, senior citizens, because they can't afford $5 home heating oil. And when we ask our politicians like Cartwright and Biden what to do, they say, go buy a Tesla if you don't like the price of gasoline. They're so out of touch. They're so elitist. And there's just a tremendous hunger for change. And we're going to be that change. We're going to win this election. I believe we're going to take back the House of Representatives. We're going to eject Nancy Pelosi, send her back to San Francisco so she can never hurt us never hurt us again. And we're also going to send a message when Joe Biden's home district, Scranton, Pennsylvania, elects me, a Republican who believes in conservative principles. The front page the next day is going to say, Joe Biden, liberal agenda repudiated in his hometown.
Wow. Well, that's an aggressive agenda. I know you're an aggressive candidate. I know you'll be an effective and aggressive congressman, which our area needs. You mentioned Nancy Pelosi. Maybe she has a career even at her age, because she's close enough to Hollywood out there in California. The acting career, like she's pretty good at performance art. And so people know what I'm talking about. You remember the visual display in one of President Trump's State of the Union speeches where he was literally finishing his speech, and just as the applause, she gets up and makes a show of it, stands up, takes the speech, and rips it up in front of a national audience for which she was rightly criticized. We need people to talk to us about what's hurting Americans now. So I'm going to turn back to you now. List, in terms of what your priorities are, what you want to do as a congressman. Start with the economy first.
I would just like to address what you just said about
Please.
the acting. It's not just Nancy Pelosi. We saw AOC pretending to be handcuffed when she wasn't handcuffed.
She wasn't.
But our local Congressman Matt Cartwright, he's quite an actor too. In his TV ads, he says, I work for you. We know he doesn't work for us. When he's voting for $1,200 stimulus checks to illegal immigrants, that's not working for us. He puts on these clothes in his commercials that maybe a shirt that was bought at Walmart. This guy's
flannel. You mean the flannel shirt?
This guy's worth $15 million. He flies a private jet back and forth to Washington. He owns 4 homes across the country. Matt Cartwright hasn't been to Walmart. I do buy my clothes at Walmart. They offer pretty good deals. Yeah. And most people around Northeast Pennsylvania do buy their clothes at Walmart or Target. They're not fancy people. We are people that want to work hard. So when I see this acting like they care about us, if they cared about us, they would close the border. If they care about us, they would bring down the price of gasoline. If they really cared about us, they would care more about creating jobs and creating opportunities for Pennsylvania's energy resources than about sucking up to George Soros and the liberals in San Francisco and New York. So Matt Cartwright and Nancy Pelosi, I don't believe they care about us. I believe they care about the people funding their campaigns, the big corporations in Washington, and the liberals in San Francisco and New York.
The national Democrats, the progressive Democrats that have control of Congress now, they're more concerned about illegal immigrants, for example, than working families, because the borders have just been overrun, flat out overrun. They're more concerned about a person's gender identity than the vast majority of people that don't have gender dysphoria. It's actually a mental, health condition. And should they be treated, I've done a view. Of course they should be treated equally under our laws. But biological males that want to call themselves Susan and identify as a female, that's their absolute right. Right up until you infringe the right of the vast majority of girls competing in sports in high school and colleges. So it goes on and on in terms of we've disincentivized, people working. One of my guests, and I'm going to turn it back to you now, made a great little quip on one of my earlier shows, and they said it this way: if you teach a person to fish, they'll fish for the rest and feed themselves for the rest of their life. If you give a person fish, they'll have one meal. Right. And the Democrats, and again I'm emphasizing, the national Democrats seem to want to hand people money almost buying votes, and we're going to make it better. And then we have a tremendous backlog in supply chains. It's difficult to get people to go back to work, but they're being paid to stay home. Right. We're making this this country a welfare state. So take it from there.
My grandfather came over through Ellis Island from Italy in 1911. He got an 8th grade education. He became a coal miner. He was proud to be a coal miner. He had 9 kids, 24 grandkids, and now one of them is going to be elected to the United States Congress. That's the American dream. He always told me, I got where I am by working 3 jobs, digging graves by hand. That's my family story. We need people that want to work, and guess what? Northeast Pennsylvania is filled with people who want to work. So when I see Cartwright and Biden voting for these anti-worker laws, that's why it's so important what you just said, that Cartwright votes with Biden 100% of the time. Joe Biden owns Matt Cartwright's vote. Matt Cartwright's a wholly owned subsidiary of the Biden administration, and your point holds. There are so many sensible Democrats out there that see what's happening in our country and say, I didn't vote for $5 a gallon gasoline, Joe Biden. I didn't vote for welfare for illegal immigrants, Joe Biden and Matt Cartwright. I didn't vote for the Green Raw deal. What are you all doing? And that's why we've seen tremendous response from Democrats and independents saying we need a change. We don't need these national leftist policies. We need a return to real, regular jobs and economy. We need a better economy. We need cheaper prices. So I think you're going to see that on November 8th. Democrats and independents rising up and saying, Joe Biden and Matt Cartwright, you guys have gone far to the left. We need a return to the center.
We're going to take a message now. Of course, we're here, as you know, you heard my open, with United States Congressional Republican nominee Jim Bognet, who's run for this office before and came very close. In fact, it was 4 days before they could call the election 2 years ago. He feels confident that this is his time. So, of course, we're here today talking about the issues in this campaign that affect you. We're going to take a break. You will hear a view of mine, a 3-minute view that touches on a subject that I think will have meaning for you. And then when we come back, we'll go back to Jim to talk about really, again, some of the issues that we face, as well as some breaking news. This show, of course, will air on Sunday, but we're filming it a few days before. So it's become a major issue in terms of campaign ads, and I'll let Jim expound upon that when we come back. We'll see you at the other side. Where have you gone, Greta Thunberg? A nation of climate apocalypse Democrats turn their lonely eyes to you. Apologies to Simon and Garfunkel for appropriating their famous line from their greatest hit, Mrs. Robinson. I'm sure you remember Greta, the Swedish child prodigy who claimed the climate apocalypse was imminent and then went on to become Time Magazine's Person of the Year in 2019. My, how the world has changed in 3 years. We are mired in recession, still dealing with COVID-19. We are being crushed by record inflation. Tens of millions of working-class families can't afford food, energy bills, or gasoline. As they head into winter facing a choice, do they heat the house or eat? In polls, climate change doesn't even make the top 10 issues Americans care about. The European Parliament has decreed that natural gas, with its low carbon footprint, is being reclassified as green energy. Even Finland's Green Party, a part of the country's coalition government, has amended its manifesto to include the endorsement of nuclear power. All the momentum in the Biden administration that they had generated against fossil fuels, beginning with his shutdown of the Keystone Pipeline, has hit the skids. He is now begging dangerous countries for their oil. Also, in a historic United States Supreme Court decision, the court ruled that the EPA did not have the power to issue sweeping regulations across the power sector. This was a crushing defeat for the radical Green New Dealers. Now back to Greta. In an editorial by Dominic Green, a renowned historian, he stated that Greta had failed to recognize that after her address at the 2020 World Economic Forum in Davos, Switzerland, she was being used by the political left corporate complex to justify their preferred solution, the Great Reset. Corporatism with a green veneer. Greta, realizing she had been used, called it greenwashing and a farce. I'm now quoting Dominic Green again. Greta wasn't at Davos this year. She had served her purpose, the priming of public opinion, so she can now be dropped. Her climate crisis is now someone else's corporate opportunity, an anti-democratic carve-up between politicians and energy companies. This makes her an inconvenient truth teller, not about the end of the world, but about the way we live today. So where is Greta today? Her prophecies of doom no longer resonating, she has joined a neo-Marxist group called Extinction Rebellion, whose members superglue themselves to trains and roads. Welcome back. Again, we're here with Republican nominee for United States Congress from the 8th Congressional District, Jim Bognet. Jim, we talked, segued at least into, and then I had to cut short so we could take our commercial break, but one of the top Democratic economists in this country is a gentleman renowned named Larry Summers. Now, as far as his resume, to give his liberal Democratic credentials, which I think we need to, as a lawyer, you understand we have to lay a foundation before we get into the specific. The foundation is this. He served under Democratic President Bill Clinton. Fairly important position. He was the Treasury Secretary of the United States of America, cabinet official. Fast forward, after 2 terms of Republican George W. Bush, Democratic, liberal President Barack Obama, President Obama. In that Democratic administration, Democrat Larry Summers served as his chief economic advisor to the President of the United States. Now, go back to spring of 2021, before the inflation catastrophe we're in now hit. And I remember reading articles, Wall Street Journal, New York Times. Larry Summers was speaking directly to the Democrats in Congress and to President Biden, a Democrat, and saying, do not, remember the American Rescue Plan? Of course you do. Where they put $2 trillion more into the economy after President Trump had already put almost $3 trillion in at the end of his term to help during the COVID-19 pandemic. Please don't do it, he said. Do not do it. You will overheat the economy. We'll have way too much money chasing too few goods and services. You're going to have historic inflation. And he then went on to say exactly, does this sound familiar? He said, what's going to happen? The Fed will be forced to raise interest rates exponentially, and that will directly put us into a recession. The one we're in now, that they're denied, but we're in it. So your comments on they're getting advice from a Democratic economic advisor telling them don't do it. And now, not only did they do the American Rescue Plan in March of 2021, now they're doing the Inflation Reduction Act, which is thinly veiled. This isn't going to help inflation. It's more spending, which will aggravate inflation. So take it from there.
All Matt Cartwright and Joe Biden want to do is spend, spend, spend. They've spent over $6 trillion of our money and our grandchildren's money, because they borrowed most of it, on these crazy programs. They want to hire 87,000 new IRS agents. That's coming after small businesses. That's coming after any taxpayer who makes more than $30,000 a year. But your spending point is so on the nose, because that's when the inflation started. When they started spending, they started spending in the spring of 2021, and 6 months later, as night follows day, inflation started taking off. Gas prices started going up. Grocery prices started growing up. So many moms have told me how grocery prices are killing them right now. And then, how about our senior citizens? They rely on Social Security. Their Social Security is being devastated by inflation, because the COLAs they're getting are not keeping up with the real rate of inflation.
Well, they're only half of it now.
Right. It's unbelievable what this is doing to our seniors. And Matt Cartwright and Joe Biden have to answer for this inflation, because they caused this inflation. And until they get their minds around that, we're not going to change things. But you know how we make them pay attention? We beat them at the ballot box. We beat Matt Cartwright and Nancy Pelosi. We put in a conservative Congress, and we will stop the spending. We will stop the insanity. We will stop the Green New Deal nonsense. So that's why I'm running. We need to save our people here in Northeast Pennsylvania from this inflation. And I don't know, 2 weeks ago, or last week actually, they said it was still at 8.4%. And Joe Biden went out and said, oh, well, that's not too bad. That's horrible. That's disgusting. That is ruining people's lives, the Biden-Cartwright inflation. And we're going to stop it.
As fate would have it, there is breaking news all over this media market, all throughout Northeast and Central Pennsylvania. The Scranton Times, for example, is the paper I get delivered to my doorstep. I grabbed it on my way out to this interview, and there you are, right under the masthead, right next to a picture of your opponent, Congressman Matt Cartwright. The two of you, right under the Scranton Times masthead, talking about campaign ads. Without getting into the he said, she said of it, I'm going to let you expound. You've run an ad they talked about in that newspaper article relative to Matt. So I want you to kind of expound on that ad and pretty much, and let me take something back right now. You have not run the ad. Your campaign has not run the ad. A PAC that supports Republican conservative principles ran the ad. So, but they are running the ad. So talk a little bit about the basis of that and what your campaign now has challenged him on.
So Matt Cartwright's record is finally catching up to him. Over his 10 years in Congress that he's done nothing, it seems like the only thing he's done is tried to work for himself. So Cartwright has many ethical challenges. Number one, many years he hasn't paid taxes on his mansions all across America. There was just an article a month ago on him not paying taxes on his D.C. mansion, which is almost worth $1 million. Number two, he's filmed ads in his congressional office, wearing his congressional pin, for campaign contributors, law firms, plaintiffs' attorneys like he and his wife wore, and his wife still is. He took money from these people and then filmed ads for him. That's unethical. Number three, trucking companies. Matt Cartwright and his family have made tens of millions of dollars suing trucking companies. And he put forth legislation 3 different times to raise the amount of the payouts, to raise the insurance payouts for trucking companies when firms like his wife's and his former firm sue them. So you have a gentleman who's made tens of millions of dollars suing trucking companies, trying to make sure his family can make more tens of millions of dollars while he's sitting in Congress. He's not representing us. He has this ridiculous line, "I work for you." He works for himself, and he works for Joe Biden. Those are the 2 people Matt Cartwright works for, and those ads are talking about that.
Well, one of the ads that he has run against you, and I like your comment on it, because in the breaking news stories, in the front page story in the Scranton Times, they talked about the ethical complaints he's dealing with, and they filed against him that you've just talked about. Well, what they talk about with him against you is, I saw commercials for the last few weeks, right around the 9/11 anniversary of that tragic event that creased the minds of anybody who was alive at the time that could understand what happened on that terrorist Black Day for America, that terrorist attack at the Twin Towers in New York. And they run an ad with your picture in the middle of it, surrounded by, in shadowy backgrounds, the actual terrorists that were part of that attack. I got to tell you, I think I'm somewhat perceptive. I was a trial lawyer, academically inclined. I even when I saw it, I said, what did Jim Bognet have to do with the terrorist attack 20 years ago? Do you want to expound on that?
Sure. I mean, what do people do when they're losing? And Matt knows he's losing. They start lying. They start making up fantastical stories. My first job out of Penn State was working in New York City for less than a year, and I walk through the World Trade Center every day. So 9/11 really hurt me to my soul. I had friends who were in New York City during that. So to see Matt Cartwright and Nancy Pelosi coming out with fantastical lies, it was great to see the Scranton Times, which nobody thinks leans to the right, come out and say that was a bold-faced lie, the allegations that were made. So I think we got to get used to Matt Cartwright. We'll do anything desperate to save his job. But what the truth of the matter is that I'm from Hazel Township, Pennsylvania. I have nothing to do with any of those things, but there's bank shots everywhere. You just see them coming out over and over again and making up fantasies. One of my supporters called me and said, "Were you responsible for Pearl Harbor?" And I said, "No, I wasn't, but we may see that on TV soon."
Well, look, at least the ads didn't put your picture right up next to Lee Harvey Oswald and the Kennedy assassination.
Right, or the Zodiac killer.
Which would have had about as much connection to you to the 9/11 attacks and representing the Saudi terrorists, which you didn't and your firm didn't. So,
but we should talk about who paid for them. Nancy Pelosi paid for those ads. Okay. And Nancy Pelosi paid for those ads because Matt Cartwright will vote for her for Speaker again. He's voted for Nancy Pelosi for Speaker 5 times. He'll vote for Nancy Pelosi again. So that's why you have Nancy Pelosi with George Soros and Mark Zuckerberg money coming into our part of Northeast Pennsylvania and telling lies, because Nancy Pelosi knows Matt Cartwright will do whatever she tells him to.
Right. Well, we have a couple of moments left, and we have a couple of other issues that rank. We've already talked about one, the economy, inflation, the recession. Right next to it, number 2, is crime. And crime right now is an issue in America. So talk a little bit about that, what you see going on.
Well, I'll tell you, I'm from Hazelton, Pennsylvania, and crime has devastated Hazelton, Pennsylvania, a lot of it being driven by the prevalence of illegal immigration. Matt Cartwright and Joe Biden are open borders guys. So as long as we have them in power, we're going to have more illegal immigration, over 2 million illegal encounters since Biden took office. But number 2, you see these weak on crime, defund the police, liberal leftists, the AOCs, the Ilhan Omars. Matt Cartwright has stood with them. Matt Cartwright even said 2 years ago when the Black Scranton Project asked him, should we defund the Wilkes-Barre Police Department? Can we do that? He said, absolutely yes. Matt Cartwright has stood with the leftists who came up with the phrase defund the police. I just got an endorsement by one of the police groups, and I'll tell you what they tell me. It's impossible to do your job and stop crime when you worry that your political leaders, as soon as something happens, are going to cut your legs out from under you. It is indefensible that Matt Cartwright and Joe Biden and Kamala Harris, whose staff was giving money to bail out criminals, stood with Antifa instead of standing with law-abiding citizens. And if you watch the news from Philadelphia every night, you see the results of Matt Cartwright and Joe Biden's soft-on-crime approach.
Well, I had a guest recently refer to Philadelphia as the crime murder capital of the world.
Right.
So, in fact, the gentleman who did it is a Pennsylvania representative and in leadership, actually running for Pennsylvania Senate now. But he was part of a group in the House of Representatives in Pennsylvania to try to bring articles, and they're still trying to file articles of impeachment against District Attorney Krasner in Philly, the Philadelphia DA. Who has a very liberal policy on crime.
Well, if we don't want Scranton and Wilkes-Barre and Stroudsburg to become Philadelphia, we better start voting for elected representatives who believe on being tough on crime. And that's not Matt Cartwright, and that's not John Fetterman, who stood on stage in Scranton last week and hugged each other and talked about how much they loved each other. John Fetterman has been releasing violent felons back into our population, and Matt Cartwright went on stage with him and gave him a hug and said, I'm behind John Fetterman 100%. We need to replace the lot of them.
Well said. Well, unfortunately, our time is up. I want to thank candidate Jim Bognet for appearing on the show and talking about the issues that affect our region and the rest of America, because these are national issues we face now. The stakes are high, and he made an eloquent representation of his candidacy and his message. You will know that, of course, as we always do in this show, Democratic Congressman Matt Cartwright will be invited to participate on this show as well in the next week or two. So hopefully he can join the show and make his case and make his arguments. Having said that, we look forward to seeing you next week. And the next show, we're pretty happy about, will be with President Donald Trump's former chief of staff. His name is Mick Mulvaney. He testified before the January 6th committee. And we will have him discussing for you, person to person on our show, the issues that he saw in the Trump Oval Office. I know you're all aware the Chief of Staff to the President of the United States is one of the most powerful positions in our government. He had a bird's eye view on what happened in the Trump administration, and he's been very candid about talking about that, as well as Dr. Anthony Fauci and the CDC, and among other things. So I look forward to that show as well. So, Jim, thank you for your time.
Thank you for having me.
Good luck in your campaign. We'll see you next week.
In Washington, crooked Matt Cartwright is hard at work for himself. An independent watchdog group filed ethics complaints against Cartwright, claiming he used his congressional office to try to enrich his family. Cartwright was named one of Congress's worst ethics violators. Worst, he even sponsored legislation that could directly benefit his family's law firm. While we struggle, crooked Matt Cartwright is looking to make Washington work for him. Congressional Leadership Fund is responsible for the content of this advertising.